Hello there, and welcome to Rod's Ramblings, a podcast reminiscing about cultural events and how they affected this 60-something. I hope 2022 is treating you all well. Do you have any regrets about missing the opportunity to see a band or an artist? I do, and I'd like to spend this episode talking about it. When I was a kid, we used to go to Weston-super-Mare for our holidays, and one of those holidays, probably around 1970 or 71, we were walking past the Winter Gardens on the way to Qstoke Woods when I saw a sign announcing who was on the bill. In big bright letters, it told me that appearing that night and that night only was a character called David Bowie. Yes, you heard correctly, the David Bowie, in Weston at the Winter Gardens. Sadly, I have to confess that I didn't know who he was and I didn't go. Oh, the shame. I've always made the excuse that his Winter Gardens appearance was made well before he had even made the Hunky Dory album, so I shouldn't feel too bad about it. After years, I still feel a mixture of disappointment and shame. However, the band that I'm going to concentrate on today isn't Bowie, but Genesis, and particularly Genesis during the Peter Gabriel era. In Birmingham during the 1970s, there were two main concert venues, the Odeon on New Street and the Town Hall in Victoria Square. Genesis were appearing at the Town Hall in support of their Foxtrot album. I'd seen them on the whistle test, heard a few tracks on the radio and was in two minds about whether to go or not. For some reason I decided against it. I can't remember the exact reason why, but I did grow to regret it. As a consolation, I bought myself the Genesis live album. It was brilliant. I fell in love with it straight away. The imagery, the storytelling, the musicality. Oh, I really regretted my decision not to go and see them. Genesis Live was released in July 1973 from the recordings of shows at Free Trade Hall Manchester and De Montfort Hall Leicester in February 1973 during the band's Foxtrot tour. It was their first album to enter the UK top 10, reaching number 9. The image on the front cover shows Peter Gabriel wearing his Magog costume, which consisted of a cloak and a geometric headdress during the performance of Supper's Ready from the Foxtrot album. This track wasn't actually included on Genesis Live, although a handful of early radio promotional double LP test pressings were created, which included a 23-minute version of the song, which was recorded at the Leicester show. I suppose because they were test pressings, the quality of the audio wouldn't have been up to broadcasting standard. However, from a nostalgic perspective, they could be worth something to a collector or an avid fan. Due to the small number of pressings that were made, copies haven't gone on sale that often, but I believe that amounts of between £1,750 and £3,000 have changed hands. Costumes like the Magog one played a massive part in Gabriel's stage performances. It all started on 28th of September 1972 at Dublin Stadium in Ireland. During the instrumental section of the musical box, Gabriel walked off stage and returned moments later wearing his wife's red dress and a fox's head, as depicted on the cover of the Foxtrot album. The other band members were surprised. They were unaware of his intentions, with Gabriel saying that he didn't tell them because they would have tried to talk him out of it. The audience loved it, the theatricality was amazing, and it would become a permanent feature of their stage shows. Other outfits that Gabriel has worn have included a low-budget reverend with stocking mask and kipper-tie dog collar from the Battle of Epping Forest. Britannia, proudly wearing a Mardi Gras version of a Roman centurion's helmet and Union Jack waistcoat, ruling the waves during Dancing with the Moonlit Night. As the band became more famous and the available budget increased, the costumes became more and more elaborate, like Henry, the old man from the musical box, who we'll talk about shortly, the narcissistic flower mask from Supper's Ready, and of course, the grotesque slipper man from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. If you haven't seen these outfits, visit the Musical Brick website, Top 10 Peter Gabriel Costumes, 1972 to 1975. The images are well worth a look. Have you become part of the vinyl revolution? I have, and I must admit that despite the superb quality of CDs and the immediacy of streaming, there's something special about taking a record out of its sleeve, placing it on the deck and sitting back reading the sleeve notes. Printed on the back of the Genesis Live album is a surrealistic short story involving a tube train, a young lady in a green trouser suit, a goldenrod and a dry cleaning ticket. I won't give anything away, but it's a very interesting read. These strange stories weren't only restricted to the album covers, but would also play their part in Gabriel's songs. 3 that I'd particularly like to mention from the live album are Get 'Em Out by Friday, The Musical Box, and Return of the Giant Hogweed. Great titles, aren't they? Get 'Em Out by Friday is set in Harlow, Essex, but could have been in any town in England during the 60s, when high-rise flats were built to provide living for the overspill of war-ravaged cities. The song tells the tale of an unscrupulous landlord, John Pebble, who sends his heavy Mark Hall, known as the Winkler, into an area to encourage existing tenants currently paying low rents to move into high-rise flats, offering them inducements such as central heating and adding a little bit of fear for good measure. One such tenant, Mrs. Barrow, is persuaded to move, but once she's in the new block, the Winkler returns again and again, raising the rent each time. This was a familiar event in the early 70s and raised the spectre of property developer Peter Rachman, who evicted existing tenants on low rents in West London in order to replace them with immigrant families who were charged exorbitant prices. Rachman became so notorious for his actions that the word Rachmanism was added to the Oxford English Dictionary as a synonym for the exploitation and intimidation of tenants. The Musical Box is a macabre story which you would expect to be the plot of a Stephen King novel rather than the basis for a nursery rhyme about merry old King Cole. It's set in Victorian Britain and concerns 2 children, Cynthia and Henry, who are playing in the gardens of a country house. It's believed that the house is based on Coxhill, a manor house in Chobham, Surrey, where Gabriel grew up. In the story, Cynthia kills Henry by knocking his head off with a croquet mallet and later discovers his musical box. When she opens it, old King Cole plays and Henry returns as a ghost. He starts to age very quickly, experiencing a lifetime's sexual desire in a few moments, and tries to persuade Cynthia to have sex with him. While this is going on, Henry's nurse arrives, throws the musical box at him and destroys them both. The song first appeared on the Nursery Crime album when it was released in 1971. The album cover is a painting based on the story showing Cynthia standing on a croquet lawn holding a mallet above her head. The nurse stands in the background and numerous heads can be seen scattered across the lawn. As you can imagine, this caused a great deal of controversy when it was first released. Gabriel doesn't solely rely on surreal ideas for his storylines. Like all good storytellers, taken factual objects as subject matter and stretched the truth for dramatic effect. One such song is The Return of the Giant Hogweed. It describes a malevolent and revengeful plant attacking human beings, much like the vegetation in John Wyndham's post-apocalyptic novel The Day of the Triffids. The Genesis song, however, is based on a real live, invasive species which is a 10-foot-high relative of the humble cow parsley. The giant hogweed, or to give it its botanical name, Heracleum mantagazanium, that's easy for you to say, is, as the song tells us, originally from southern Russia and Georgia. It was a plant introduced to Europe and Britain in the early 19th century, before the reign of Queen Victoria. Gabriel uses poetic license to tell us it was a Victorian explorer who gave the plant to the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew in London. Apparently, with each hogweed plant producing up to 20,000 seeds, all carried by wind and rain, they spread rapidly, and they can now be found in every part of Great Britain. So, next time you have cod in parsley sauce for Sunday dinner, make sure you finish it off. You never know when the parsley might be rehearsing for a remake of Wyndham's classic novel. The 2 remaining tracks that I haven't mentioned yet are Watcher of the Skies and The Knife, which open and close the album respectively. Watcher of the Skies first appeared on the Foxtrot album. The title has a sci-fi ring to it, and Rutherford and Banks attribute influences to Arthur C. Clarke novels and the Watcher comics. They wrote the lyrics during a sound check for a gig at a deserted airfield in Naples, both wondering at the time what an alien would think if it landed on that site during a visit to Earth. The song would go on to open the band's shows between 1972 and 1974 and remain a staple part of their live set in a shortened format in later years. Interestingly, the song has only been performed as an instrumental since Gabriel's departure. During the late 60s and early 70s, we were obsessed with space, weren't we? The moon landing had taken place in July 1969. Bowie had hits with Space Oddity, Life on Mars and Starman, and Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon was released in 1973. TV wasn't much different. There was a programme called Space 1999 about the inhabitants of Moonbase Alpha who get sent uncontrollably into space following a nuclear explosion on the moon. Each week, they would have to defend themselves from attacks by alien life forms. In the real world, we've been watching the skies for many years, not necessarily to monitor a possible alien attack, although I can't guarantee that, but to better understand the universe that we're a part of. Helping to keep a watchful lookout has been the Hubble Space Telescope. NASA was in the process of obtaining funding for it when the Genesis lads were writing and performing Watcher of the Skies. They were successful, and in 1990 the telescope was launched with an expected useful lifetime of 15 years. It has surpassed that expectation, is still in operation today, and is expected to decay sometime between 2030 and 2040. To ensure that our understanding of the universe continues to develop, a replacement for Hubble, the James Webb Space Telescope, which can operate in near-infrared light, has been developed and was launched on Christmas Day last year. That's 2021 for any life forms that may be listening in years to come. That was a bit heavy, wasn't it? Now, let's get back to the album. The Knife closes the album and has the honour of being the last song that our 5 famous musicians have played together. After leaving Genesis, Gabriel went on to release 4 albums between 1977 and 1982, when he had the idea to stage a festival of dance and music from around the world. This was the very first WOMAD concert. Acts from around the globe were booked, but due to logistics and escalating costs, it turned out to be a commercial failure, leaving Gabriel facing financial ruin. When his former bandmates heard of Gabriel's predicament, they suggested putting together a one-off concert to raise the necessary funds to pay off the debts. Banks, Rutherford, Collins and Gabriel would be joined by Chester Thompson on guitar and Daryl Sturmer on bass. Due to contractual obligations, they couldn't perform as Genesis, but chose the title Six of the Best, alluding to their private school days. The concert itself took place on Saturday the 2nd of October 1982 at the National Bowl in Milton Keynes. The set list comprised of a variety of songs from their collective back catalogues, one of which, In the Air Tonight, had Gabriel playing drums and Collins on vocals. Steve Hackett was able to join them on stage during the encores in time to play guitar on I Know What I Like in My Wardrobe and actually close the set with The Knife. The revenues generated by the concert allowed the WOMAD creditors to be paid, the festival to be established, and Gabriel to resume his solo career. After Genesis Live, the band would record Selling England by the Pound, which would produce their first hit single, I Know What I Like in My Wardrobe. The line, There's Always Been Ethel, will always hold a place in my heart. The final album that Gabriel made with the band was The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is worth an episode all of its own. Watch this space. It was during the making of The Lamb that a rift began to form in the band. Gabriel's wife Jill experienced serious difficulties with her pregnancy, and when their daughter Anna Marie was born, Gabriel's priorities changed and the band were no longer at the front of the queue for his time. Mike Rutherford later recognised that they hadn't been very supportive of Peter and Jill during their problems, only really understanding what they were going through once the other band members had children of their own. The name Genesis is now associated with world tours and multi-million selling albums, but that hasn't always been the case. They were first formed in 1967 when Banks, Gabriel and Rutherford were joined by Anthony Phillips and Chris Stewart while they were pupils at Charterhouse School in Surrey. They contacted Jonathan King, who was a former pupil at the school, and he helped to make their first album, From Genesis to Revelation. Unfortunately, it went on to sell a miserly 649 copies over a 12-month period. Banks put the reason down to record shops filing the album under the religion section due to its title. Despite this blow, the band persevered, undergoing a number of lineup changes, eventually recruiting Phil Collins on drums and Steve Hackett on guitar. Chris Stewart went on to become a successful author and to run a farm near Orgiva in Spain. He's written 3 autobiographical books about his life there, Driving Over Lemons, Parrot in the Pepper Tree and the Almond Blossom Appreciation Society. Despite success with Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering, Steve Hackett didn't think that the band had a future without Gabriel as their frontman and left the band to pursue a solo career. He now incorporates much of the early material into his live set. Following Hackett's departure, Banks, Rutherford and Collins decided to continue and have been extremely successful, recording 9 studio and 5 live albums. They are currently on the road with the Lost Domino reunion tour and are due to play 3 sold-out concerts at the O2 Arena in London in March. I think that the last time they played together was about 14 years ago, and during that time Phil Collins has suffered with his health. He now has to sit on a chair during the performance, and his place behind the drums has been taken up by his son Nicholas. It's rumoured that this could be their final tour, unless Peter Gabriel decides to join them, that is. Now, that would be something I'd like to see, but I imagine you'll need to take out a couple of mortgages to afford the tickets. Over the last few years, if you haven't been able to see your favourite band in the flesh, as it were, you could go and see a tribute band, some of whom are excellent. You could even argue that with your favourite band being a bit long in the tooth, the Young Pretenders are probably better. One such act is the Musical Box from Canada that based their act on Genesis's early material and are the only tribute band to receive support and approval from Banks, Gabriel, etc. They were recently due to appear in Birmingham, but like every other live performance planned over the last 18 months, it was cancelled due to COVID. Have I missed my chance to witness that imagery, storytelling and musicality, or will the post-vaccine New Year present one final opportunity? I suppose only time will tell. Just before we finish, many of you have said how much you've been enjoying the trivia from previous episodes and would like some in every one. So, keeping in the theatrical mode that I'm sure Mr. Gabriel would approve of, do you know what the world's most expensive film props and costumes are? According to The Guardian, in an article that was published on the 27th of November 2017, the top 5 are as follows. At number 5 is Audrey Hepburn's white ascot dress from the film My Fair Lady, which sold for $3.7 million at auction. At number 4 is the actual Maltese falcon statue from the film of the same name, which sold for $4.1 million. At number 3 is Marilyn Monroe's dress from the film The 7-Year Itch. You know the one, where she walks across the grating and the dress blows up around her waist. That sold for just under $4.6 million. Allegedly, the dress that she wore when she sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President to JF Kennedy was even more valuable, selling for $4.8 million. That didn't make our list, of course, as it wasn't in a film. Pipping Marilyn to number 2 is James Bond's Aston Martin DB5, which appeared in Goldfinger and Thunderball. That went for $4.6 million. Holding the top spot is Robbie the Robot from the 1956 film The Forbidden Planet. It would also go on to appear in The Twilight Zone and The Addams Family and was sold for an amazing $5.375 million. These items and figures may well have changed since the article was written, but they do show how valuable these iconic items can become. So, thank you for sharing my ramble through my memories of Genesis during the Peter Gabriel era. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm off now to see what we've got hidden away in our loft. So, until next time on Rod's Ramblings, cheers and take care.